Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat and Professor Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of Prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat, and I'm joined by my erstwhile friend, the Professor Richard Leduc.
Well, hello, Gerrit. Thank you so much for having me back. I
feel like you don't need to say that. You're always here.
Thank you so much for having me back, Gerrit. We're going to do something a little bit different in this episode. We've produced about 250 of these things, and you know what? Let's change it up just a little bit.
We're now going to only talk about business tactics and ways to improve your small business.
This is true. I do provide that as a free consulting service to small businesses because of my passion for small business. So hit me up, and we'll set up a Zoom meeting, and we'll talk about your sales and business development. We did a premium episode, Joseph Smith and the Restoration. So that 22 episodes in, and you finally got to Joseph Smith.
We mentioned him multiple times
in the title. So, there's a lot of context to set up. You know, it's important that you know what Joseph Smith is coming into, so that you can understand the real value for the restored gospel. It's a great. This is me pitching the premium. It's pretty good.
We have had several people ask, "What is the premium?"
Yes,
people who've are recently joining us. What is the premium? How do I sign up? First and foremost, the premium is only hosted on either Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Those are the two ways that people use our podcast most or listen most, and so those are the platforms where you can sign up for the premium if you decide to. Again, the premium, the whole purpose of it is a way of trying to help support this podcast and keep it going. And it has things like there's a podcast that's dedicated to just American and world history called Condemned to Repeat It, where we talk about, right now we're talking about the American Revolution.
We've been talking about that for a year and a half, and we've got about another year and a half to go.
No, we're almost done. Yeah,
okay.
Yorktown's coming at us.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Yorktown's it's bearing down on us right now.
My gosh. You guys don't know. That's thrilling.
Yeah, the Comte de Grasse is on his way. Your French admiral who saves the day.
Oh my gosh. That's fantastic.
It's going to be one of the few times in Richard's life history he's going to be able to say, "You know what? The French saved us."
Well, so there's that. There's Joseph Smith and the Restoration. That's the most popular with the missionaries. So we provide the premium to missionaries for free. We send them access to the Google Drive that has it, so they can access it on their missions. So if you have a missionary that is really interested in understanding church history and specifically comparative Christianity and how that compares to the restored gospel and some of those things, it's hugely valuable. We also have Holy Places from Our Past, aka Crinkling Leaves. We haven't done one of those this year, but we have quite a few
in the hopper or in the past.
Or in the past. And so the idea there is when you go to a particular site, here's some things to know about this historic site that might be of value to you. So we'll be doing more of those as well. So that Gerrit shrugged. Apparently we won't. But so anyway, that's the premium. And we did a Joseph Smith and the Restoration a week or so ago. And the intent, Gerrit talked about several of the visions that were had by Lucy Mack Smith and by Joseph Smith Sr. And I asked a relatively innocent question, I felt, and I was trying to make a point about how many people at the time of the Restoration are having these miraculous experiences and that the Lord was helping to prepare them. But I may or may not have come across maybe more antagonistic than I intended.
I wasn't offended.
Yes, but so Joseph Smith Sr., the vision that he had many parts that had a lot of similarity to Lehi's vision. And so I brought up a point about antagonists and how they might perceive that. And then Gerrit
apparently became unhinged in a way that was biblical, and I'm not entirely sure why. So in order
I know why. There are like Dr. Philastus Hurlbut, Eber Howe. Those are a couple of triggers that you have that send you into a blind rage. You wake up the next day. What happened?
Exactly. I woke up like, what did I say? I knew that I was in trouble because my brother texted and said, I think that's the record number of times someone has used the word fornicator on the Standard of Truth podcast.
It was a lot of times.
So look, what Richard is doing is he has cut out part of that rant, and we're going to work that into what we're talking about today, so that a little bit of a taste of the premium content for our non-premium subscribers, and also because it relates to the topic we're going to talk about today.
It does, and I will say though, so it's not a good thing to be angry all the time, but there is such a thing as righteous indignation. And I feel like you did a good job of walking the line on that. And you have people listen to it that are cheering, huzzah, like somebody defending how ridiculous some of these things are. You make the point all the time that some of these things from church history are complex and they're difficult to understand. And some of them are outright lies. And the outright lies you will not stand
Yeah, those
for.
are the ones that bother me most. When someone isn't just saying, you know what, we don't really know how plural marriage worked. Instead, they're claiming, that Sidney Rigdon clandestinely met with Joseph Smith prior to Joseph ever claiming that he had the plates so that he could help write the Book of Mormon, and then pretend that he had nothing to do with the Book of Mormon. Something like that.
Something like that. So should we get quickly to a Phoebe Draper?
Yes, let's read
Palmer
some email.
Brown mailbag.
Something that will calm me down.
Well,
I have too much caffeine in my system, and I'm angry.
So this first
Richard showed up, and it just made me mad.
That's usually how I arrive at most places. Like, I was happy, now you're here. All right, this first email comes to us from Devin. I don't have any questions, but wanted to share my deep appreciation for your work on the podcast and wanted to share my testimony, how my testimony has grown because of listening to you. I always thought I had a gift of belief and have never struggled with knowing that the restored Church of Jesus Christ is led by living prophets. I have never had a major faith crisis over a policy or change in the church. Even if I didn't fully understand something, my testimony and living prophets allowed me to accept that this is his church, and following the counsel of church leaders would bring blessings and understanding in time. While I don't think I have a weak testimony, this gift of belief has allowed me to coast or to be on autopilot when it came to my personal testimony. When President Nelson read the Restoration Proclamation at General Conference in April 2020, I admit that I was a little bored. I thought to myself, well, that's why we don't read last names. This seems obvious. I know
You'll be getting a call from your stake president soon.
Yeah.
Really, all this podcast is a clandestine Stasi-style police state. We have a network.
Stasi.
Yeah,
who
the East German secret police.
Yeah, no, I know what the Stasi. I don't know when the Napoleon Wars are, but I know what Stasi is.
I see. Yeah, that we are clandestinely trying to find out whenever anyone says anything about the prophet, and then we sick their stake president.
If you had Stasi in the Standard of Truth bingo card, boy,
you just got the free space. Yeah,
because we're going to mention that from now on. Every
Stasi comes up a lot.
I admit that I was a little bored. This seems obvious. I know all this already. I forgot much of that conference address and moved on to other things. In October of 2023, I received a strong prompting that I needed to study church history. I have had a few times in my life where the Spirit spoke so clearly into my mind. It felt urgent and of the utmost importance. Along with that prompting came the reminder of the Restoration Proclamation. When the family, a proclamation to the world, came out in 1995, most members of society would have agreed with that document. So I began to wonder what will happen 20 to 30 years from now when the Lord needs his church to have strong testimonies of the restoration. First of all, I remember, did you have to go hand it out? Do you have to pass it around?
The proclamation of the family?
Yeah.
I don't recall doing that, but I mean,
So Becky's ward, they sent them out to hand it around to everybody. And, you know, in the part of Idaho I'm from, it's about, I don't know, 10, 15% LDS. So the majority of people aren't LDS, and we would hand it to them, or she would, and they'd be like, yeah, like what are you?
Yeah, we believe all of this.
Yeah, what are you talking about? Why are you?
Yeah.
Anyway, and now bigotry.
Well, I mean, it certainly demonstrates how much the world shifts in its understanding, and I mean, I was grateful for the proclamation of the Restoration for that very reason. I mean, we hear people all the time who want to have their cake and eat it too. I want all of the doctrines that Joseph Smith revealed. I love them. They are altering. The idea that you have a premortal life, the idea that you have a heavenly mother, the idea that marriage can exist after this life. I want all of those things. But I don't want to have to deal with the fact that Joseph Smith practiced plural marriage. So what am I going to do? I'm going to ostracize and minimize and create a box that I place Joseph in, and I slowly talk about him as if he's a fallen prophet. Now, of course, I'll have other people to help me along my way, people who themselves are claiming that they have the truth, right? But the sheer hypocrisy that I guess a lot of people don't realize as they do this is that the only reason you have a strong belief about, say, your heavenly mother is because Joseph Smith's a prophet. Now, let's say Joseph Smith's not a prophet. Well, you don't get to believe you have a heavenly mother anymore because that's a revelation that comes to a prophet. So you don't get to just believe it because you want to. Not without coming to the logical conclusion of where did the idea come from. And I know that some people think the idea came from the person they're watching on a YouTube clip. That's not where the idea came from. The reality is that, you know, you can have pastors from other faiths that will say things like, well, of course you'll be with your wife in heaven. I mean, we'll all be there in heaven. I mean, yeah, we believe in, you know, that you'll be with your wife in heaven. You have to be very clear. Do you believe in marriage in heaven? And I can tell you right now, because you can go to all their websites, you can read all of their doctrines if they put it up there, and they will tell you very, very, very clearly. Marriage is for this life only. It does not exist in heaven.
It says so in the Bible, Gerrit.
Exactly. And yet you have Latter-day Saints who want to, rather than dealing with the intricacies of history as you talked about, rather than dealing with the fact that maybe we don't know everything and just accepting the things that we have had revealed to us, they want to denigrate Joseph Smith as a prophet. Well, that way I can just, you know, believe whatever I want to believe and not have to come to terms with the fact that God commanded him to practice plural marriage or whatever it is. But the reality is it's a logical inconsistency. Yeah, this person's absolutely a prophet whenever they say things that I already want to believe. But when they say things that aren't, that's how I know that they're a false prophet at that point. Well, what makes them a false prophet? Well, they said things I don't like. Okay, that's not logical. That is someone who is trying to create a false narrative to make themselves feel better. So I'm grateful for the Restoration Proclamation. I'd actually been asked by a couple of people in the past year before that was issued, and fairly prominent people. So I'm not talking about, you know, not that I know
Richard.
Yeah, so not Richard. Okay, people that are like way more prominent than he is. Like Richard's dissertation advisor, who's not a Latter-day Saint, so he couldn't possibly care.
But Tom, if you're listening, we just love you here at the Standard of Truth podcast. We think you do great work.
Yeah, although Becky's getting a little irritated. Anyway, because she wants him to be done.
Yeah.
She sees you as an impediment.
Yeah.
Stop trying to make the dissertation good. Just make it done. Right? So that people, they said to me, do you think the church is trying to go the way of minimizing Joseph Smith as part of our beliefs? There's been so much focus on the fact that, we're the Church of Jesus Christ and we need to make sure Christ is the center of literally every lesson that we have. And it got to the point where, you're sitting in a ward council and people are just saying the word Jesus over and over again because they think that's what they're supposed to be doing. Like, well, in Jesus, that kind of stuff. Well, so they said, I think maybe the church is trying to minimize Joseph Smith's role in what we believe because, it's embarrassing. That's what I had two different people say this to me. And then President Nelson issued the proclamation on the Restoration. So I actually have no doubt that in the coming decades, you will have people want to push our church in the direction that, say, the Community of Christ went. And that is to minimize Joseph's revelations, to minimize him as a central figure. Now, look, there are plenty of members of the Community of Christ who still absolutely revere Joseph as a prophet. But the trend is to minimize Joseph's teachings and Joseph's experiences because they're difficult to deal with in a modern Christian world. So I think that we will look 20 years from now on the proclamation of the Restoration, and there will be people that will saying, you don't really believe this, right? Inside of the church, we'll be questioning it and criticizing it. So I have to wholeheartedly agree on that. I don't even know if I'm agreeing or disagreeing at this point. What am I doing, Richard?
You're agreeing with Devin,
but angrily.
Yes, but Devin appreciates it.
Okay, he wants it.
He's messaged
Okay.
me. Well, Gerrit, to that point, there was a leadership training that President Holland recently did, where he talked about kind of the very thing that you're describing. He said, "We learned from President Ballard's deep and abiding testimony that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. President Ballard was a descendant of Hiram Smith, and he had a great love for his family heritage. He spoke often of Joseph Smith and testified of the prophet's majestic role in the Restoration. Even in his last conference talk, President Ballard shared a sweet testimony of the prophet saying, 'Though my message this morning is simple, it's deep, and it's full of love for the prophet Joseph Smith. Similarly, when we testify that Jesus is the Christ and God is our eternal Father, we should make certain that we bear testimony of the prophet Joseph Smith and the restoration of the gospel. May we pause a little more, often to think about those who've given so much to the kingdom past and present.'" So this was in a leadership training that's on churchofjesuschrist.org.
That's, first of all, that's what you expect from President Holland, and both President Holland and President Ballard, were champions of understanding that Joseph Smith and his revelations are central to our theology. This is the Church of Jesus Christ. We get it. It's the Church of Jesus Christ. None of this exists without the sacrifice of our Lord Jesus. But none of the things that we know about who Jesus even is and why we are here and what the purpose of this life is and what the aftermath of this life will be, none of those things exist without the restoration of the gospel and the prophet Joseph Smith in his revelations and the subsequent prophets that followed him. It was a discussion we had in our elders quorum on Sunday. We were talking about, the importance of temple covenants. We were talking about President Nelson's talk, where he's just reiterating, without temple covenants, without keys, we're a nice moral institution.
Yeah. Nothing more.
Yeah. We do some charity work and tip of the hat and we're on our way. You know what I mean? Like that's it. The entire point of the Restoration is to provide the tools and doctrine that will allow us to gain the knowledge and make the covenants necessary to be exalted. You remove Joseph Smith from the equation, and we don't even know what exaltation is. We lose why we're here. Heavens, we lose that God and Jesus are separate beings if we remove Joseph Smith from the equation. So I don't know if that will be a trend that happens, Devin. I don't know if on down the line, people will desperately try to focus on Jesus to the exclusion of the revelations of Joseph. But our church can't exist. It has no meaning if it doesn't have the keys that Jesus directed be given to Joseph and the apostles and prophets that follow him. That's why I think President Holland is saying you have to testify both of those things together. Because it's great to have a testimony of Jesus, and if that's all you have, that's wonderful. It's great to know that you have a Savior who loves you, who died for you, and if that's all you have, that is awesome. But there is a lot more than just knowing that your Savior died for you. There's knowing who you are. There's knowing why you're here. There's knowing that all of your family relationships can be bound together in the eternities. There's knowing that this life isn't just some kind of cosmic game that God plays with you because he thinks it's funny to watch you struggle. There's knowing that there are steps you have to take to become like your Heavenly Father and your Heavenly Mother, because those steps are essential to becoming a god and a goddess. That's what the church brings us. That's what Joseph Smith and the keys and revelations he received from Jesus bring us. Someone who thinks that they can have the one but not the other has not thought very long about what it is they believe. They've just thought an awful lot about what they want to believe.
So Devin goes on.
Oh, sorry, Devin.
So
maybe we need to cut that out.
No.
Okay.
That's great.
You'll know whether or not we cut that out by whether or not you're listening to it right now.
I looked for accurate church history resources and was led to your podcast. Well,
okay.
My gosh.
All right, now
Devin.
Devin ceased being a credible witness. Who told you to come to our podcast?
I don't know.
I will tell you that somebody, I had a bishop friend I have a friend who's a bishop, just kind of name dropping on you.
Catholic?
Yeah, Catholic bishop. That'd be way more powerful if he's a Catholic bishop.
I know.
No, it's just some, loser Latter-day Saint bishop.
Some accountant?
No, he's a great guy, actually. I have a friend who's a bishop up in your neck of the woods, Farmington. And he said that they had a stake training among the bishops and the bishoprics, and that the stake president said, there are other resources you can use to help people answer questions, and he named our podcast as one of them.
How about that?
Yeah, we finally arrived.
That's right.
Yeah.
After listening to lesson after lesson in gospel doctrine about follow him,
yeah,
we're always chasing the big brother.
No, we'll never get there. But anyway, go ahead.
I listened earnestly, and in December 2023, received an answer why the Lord directed me to study church history with such urgency. My family and I stayed with my sister for Christmas. A few days into our stay, my sister sat me down to explain why she no longer attends church. She explained that the ward mission leader had stated during a Fifth Sunday lesson that he was glad that the church has the actual scrolls that were translated into the Book of Abraham. Now that's a very specific topic for a Fifth Sunday.
That is.
Usually it's temple and family history. It's missionary work. This one, the Abraham scrolls. That's a very specific topic.
The lesson today is how our church possesses the entirety of the scrolls purchased by Joseph Smith when he bought the mummies. Now, there's lots of problems with that. First and foremost is, why is the lesson on that?
Wait, it's possible. It's possible the lesson was on faith, and he's just like, in classic. There's some times where you might have a ward mission leader that might stray from the core doctrines of.
We have a former ward mission leader of mine in Wisconsin who listens to the show regularly, Jeff, and the greatest ward mission leader of all time. I mean, literally the greatest of all time. Everything was on point. Nothing was straying off topic. And so you can have amazing ones. You can also have ones who think that the most essential part of the gospel is patriarchal blessings.
It is funny. When I was on my mission, it seemed like I was constantly afraid of word mission leaders. Since I've been home, I'm like, yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but on your mission, maybe I was especially sensitive.
Yeah, you're like, we haven't even taught him about the first vision yet. We haven't even taught him about the first vision yet. I'm like, well, you guys started paying your tithing? Like, no, they haven't started paying their tithing. We met with them one time. Anyway.
Not only is it incomplete, but my sister's testimony hinged on this statement. She felt like it would be the proof she needed to really believe in the church.
I'm not totally following at this point. So the ward mission leader said, you know, the church has all of the scrolls of the book of Abraham, right? Which, just so everyone listening knows, we don't. We have 2 fragments from them. And as we've talked about before, in much to the dismay of this historian, one of the fragments is reinforced and backed with the original Kirtland Temple plans that they chopped up and pasted the part of the fragment of the scrolls to.
That's good.
But I'm not bitter about it.
No, but is there a swamp problem, a humidity problem? Do we put these with the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon?
No, the scrolls end up being they end up being destroyed in the Chicago fire, actually. Yeah, so they end up moving around a little bit because they don't go with the saints out west. And so they end up being sold and they change possessions and they end up going to a museum and they end up being destroyed in a fire. So we have almost none of them.
So first that, then Caleb Williams. This is not Chicago, you are.
Well, I mean, Richard's still a little bitter about, why are you bitter about Caleb Williams? What if he's amazing?
Well, he might be amazing, but Justin Fields wasn't the answer, that's for sure. And I thought that he was. And I've been a Bears fan for a long time and they're just terrible.
Well, what about all the people that are hating on the Falcons for drafting Penix after also signing Cousins?
First of all, that's a great question. And Devin, this is why this is a bad example of a church history podcast.
Right. We've gone far afield. I'm just trying to simmer down because apparently I've been triggered again.
You have. You're coming in hot.
I've got
coming hard in the paint.
I've got a problem.
And so you're potentially questioning that what she's saying is her reason might not actually be her reason.
To me, it's a very weird thing to say. As long as I know the church has all of the original scrolls of the Book of Abraham, then I have a testimony. Because you believe in the Book of Mormon, right? And I don't know that we have a whole lot of the original gold plates laying around.
Chicago Fire?
No, Angel Moroni.
Oh.
Angel Moroni took them back. But same thing with multiple other things. I mean, do we have the original Hebrew manuscripts that Joseph is using to receive the book of Moses as a revelation? Nope. So it just seems a weird thing to say, my testimony hinged on whether or not we actually possess the scrolls.
Well, I mean, Gerrit, it's possible she's being hyperbolic and that thing caused her to go down a rabbit hole that opened it up. And maybe she was being...
Whereas Devin's rabbit hole led him to this as a credible source.
Seriously.
Boy, rabbit holes will kill you, Devin.
Her personal study then led her to other sources and incorrect views on Joseph Smith. I bet that it did on Joseph Smith. She spent about an hour telling me about how Joseph Smith is a fraud.
Oh boy.
Here, it's gurgling inside.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to take 5, and it's just gonna be Richard, and you'll hear from the outside like a mumble, like, ah!
And was trying to get rich.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. That's
Joseph
what he was trying to do.
The gold digger.
Yeah.
I didn't attempt to correct her or argue her points, as I don't think she was open to learning. What I am thankful for is that nearly every point she brought up was a subject that I had been taught about through your podcast.
Oh, that's awesome.
I don't think she would have shaken my testimony, but I can at least know I was proactively learning and strengthening my testimony before this event happened. It has been a joy to listen to each episode, this one excluded, and I am thankful. He doesn't say that, but I am assuming.
Yeah,
I'm
saying it.
I'm so thankful that the Lord prompted you to create this source of information. Thank you for sharing your time and your talents with us.
Devin, thank you for that email. Honestly, it is one of the whole points of the podcast is to try to help people have some basis for the hope they have, and to help people understand that when that person says, well, the church doesn't even have an answer for this. Yeah, there are answers. Just because they weren't the first click on your letter to the CES director website doesn't mean that there aren't answers. I'm sorry to hear that your sister is struggling. And look, I feel bad for her. It's part of the reason why I get so volatile, I guess. I'm normally a mild-mannered person.
You are.
Kind of.
Yeah, sports and Joseph Smith.
Sports and Joseph Smith sent me over the edge. I mean, the reason why is because there is a liar out there, a liar, who took your sister's insecurities and her questions and flooded them as if they were some kind of an expert with pseudo-intellectual, faux historical
garbage
expletive, right? And that hurt her and hurt her testimony. And in a lot of ways, I don't blame her, because how would she know where to look or not to look? And so that kind of stuff really does bother me. I mean, okay, maybe the ward mission leader shouldn't be telling her that we have all the scrolls and we don't have all the scrolls. It seems like a really weird point to make. Hey, we have all the scrolls, even though we don't even have the scrolls. At least say you think we have all the scrolls. I don't know what the conversation actually was. But the podcast exists really as just our desperate attempt to try to help people feel the Spirit as we talk about these historical issues and questions, because we don't want people to feel alone. We want people to feel like that there is some reason for the hope they have. We'll never be able to replace, what you're getting at church on Sunday or what it is the prophet's saying. Anything that the prophet says, you go with that. But hopefully that you know that we're a brotherhood and a sisterhood of people that are all desperately trying to build the kingdom of God, and we're trying to find ways to explain the things that have happened in the past and maintain our hope and our faith in what we know to be true.
That's great. This next email then leads us into the actual subject of this episode that is over 30 minutes in.
It seems like maybe the last part was the subject of our episode, I guess.
Well, so, I mean, this is going to be, I want to call this episode Gerrit Goes Hard in the Paint on Hurlbut and Solomon Spaulding, but we'll see. So we'll
see how it develops.
We'll see how this
maybe
develops.
I'll be calm.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
Yeah, there's a chance.
Things happen.
Yeah, I don't know.
So this is going to be a two-parter, though. I'm confident of that. This next email comes to us from Matt. Subject, historical alteration. Yes, I found this podcast last week and I love it.
Did he say yes with like exclamation point?
It's an exclamation point. It might be yes. Maybe he's just a fan of the Yankees and it might be Yes Network. It's all caps.
So, Richard's a fan of the Yankees.
I am a fan of the Yankees.
And now we just lost all of our listeners in New England.
Yeah, all three of them. I found this podcast last week and I love it. I've cranked out 20 episodes so far, starting from the beginning without falling asleep even once. Well, now that is a feat.
Yeah, were you in the back of Officer R's squad car by chance?
Yeah,
is that why?
Our podcast is used in astronaut training. Yeah. So if you've been able to do 20 without falling asleep, that is impressive.
I'm hopeful that we can get the U.S. government to take it up as a way of torturing prisoners, right? Like playing loud music and stuff. Really, they just play this, and they're like, I'll tell you what you want to know.
My question, how would you address someone saying something like, well, they obviously tried to leave a specific paper trail to cover their lies, etc. For example, in an episode I'm listening to now, you say that while others will, out of desperation, claim Sidney Rigdon must have had a hand in writing the Book of Mormon, we have no historical evidence that he and Joseph Smith knew each other in 1828, 1829. How does a historian guard against the fact that Joseph and Sidney could have tried to ensure no paper trail would show that they knew each other? I'm thinking, one, they couldn't possibly find and control all of their neighbors' journals, and two, pulling off such a foreseeing and comprehensive feat across all their quote-unquote lies over decades would be at least as impressive as dictating the Book of Mormon in 60 working days with no edits. But what do professional historians do with this? Genriff. Well, I say Genriff.
Yeah, I was going to say, did he just come at me hard with my name wrong? Yeah. Wow, this is not going to be the way to calm me back down. So
one thing though is that, I mean, you say all the time, look, could they have known each other? I mean, I guess there's no evidence.
Right. And so you really hit the nail on the head. Okay, we have 12,000 Joseph Smith documents, and not all of them are ones produced by him. And you have thousands of secondary sources and accounts where people are talking about Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith. You have an entire book, Mormonism Unveiled, that is written by someone who's a contemporary of Sidney Rigdon, who knows very well the people going to Sidney Rigdon's church, Eber Howe, who attacks every single conceivable aspect of Mormonism, so-called, but he doesn't make that argument. So if there was even a slight contemporary source, even if there was a bad source that said, oh yeah, Sidney Rigdon actually was already in Palmyra with Joseph for lots of time and stuff, and that's where it came up. I assume that's what it was.
Lots of time and stuff.
Why is that not part of his argument? He's writing an anti-Mormon book. He's using all kinds of things that are spurious sources. Why isn't he making that argument?
When does the Sidney Rigdon... It seems like Sidney Rigdon is grasping at straws when the other ones prove to be less effective arguments. When does Sidney Rigdon even come up as a potential argument that they must have known each other? And
it comes about in the 20th century when people can't find another way to explain it. Look, the Solomon Spaulding Manuscript explanation, this idea that there is a preacher who wrote a bunch of novels and they were religious sounding, and he used the Bible phraseology because he's a preacher, and because he's a preacher he really knows that Bible, that's where the Book of Mormon actually comes from. That is the primary explanation for the Book of Mormon from 1834 until the turn of the 20th century. It is repeated over and over and over again, and it's a preposterous argument. So only after that argument gets totally discredited.
And why is it discredited?
It's discredited because they find the actual manuscript that everyone said is literally word for word of Solomon Spaulding's book, except that when we found it, none of the words are the same. So one of the worst parts of claiming that words are word for word is when none of them are. That makes it a bad argument. That's how you know it's a bad argument. No, it's word for word plagiarized right from Solomon Spaulding. Okay? Are any of the names the same? No. Are any of the words the same? No. Is the story the same? No. Is it using movable type as it puts it on the and there's it's a reality. So there's this claim that Sidney Rigdon has part of this, right? But look at what it says in the original anti-Mormon book, with Sidney Rigdon, Mormonism Unveiled. The plans of their deception seem to have more fully matured after the meeting of Smith and Rigdon. The latter being very intimate with the scriptures, a close reasoner, and as fully competent to make white appear black and black white as any other man, and at all times prepared to establish to the satisfaction of great numbers of people the negative or the affirmative of any and every question from Scripture. He was forthwith appointed to promulgate all the absurdities and the ridiculous pretensions of Mormonism, and call upon the holy prophets to prove all the words of Smith. So, the person who's most desperate to destroy Mormonism, so-called, in 1834, is saying that Sidney Rigdon didn't have anything to do with it beforehand, but once he becomes a part of it, he then lends his scripture knowledge to the ways that he defends Joseph. But I'll bet Eberhau's wrong about that because I just want him to be.
Well, he's wrong about a lot.
He is wrong about a lot of things. But back to the question that Matt has. So here's how you know whether a historical argument is a good argument. Is there a historian with a PhD and publications in the topic making the argument? If they aren't, why aren't they? Okay, so let's say there's evidence that Sidney Rigdon just hurried and ran over there, found some obscure Joseph Smith. I mean, how do they even know each other? No one has any idea. What, Sidney Rigdon just received his own revelation that, like, I guess I'm going to go to some podunk town on the Erie Canal and find the Smith family and see if he's got plates, and then I'll help him write. I mean, just... There's no evidence of any of this at all. So a historian deals in what sources actually exist. We are certainly aware that people do destroy their papers. People do try to prevent certain negative things from coming out. This is most especially apparent when it comes to politicians. Again, very hard to believe that politicians would attempt to control the narrative of how they're perceived.
Not today, back then.
Back then, in the 19th century, politicians would lie and cheat and steal.
I feel like there's a great opportunity here. I made a comment about transitory inflation and citing Janet Yellen, and I didn't want this to turn political. I was just mentioning that she said later that she should not have said transitory. I feel it's very important to get that
right.
on the record.
But under this argument that Matt is making, Janet Yellen would have had banned from the internet all of the words that would have said
that she ever said transitory.
Yeah, I mean, right. It is very, very, very difficult in history to make arguments without the evidence. Now, so someone could say something like, well, isn't it possible that Sidney Rigdon, traveled to New York, met Joseph Smith, concocted the idea of writing the whole Book of Mormon, and even though he was present back in Ohio the entire time the Book of Mormon is being written, or maybe he wrote it before he went back, but how I mean, there's no time frame there. Even though we have no sources that would help that argument, and even the very antagonists of the time are not making that argument. The only person who's going to make that today is someone who isn't a historian. Someone who's trading on the what ifs and the possiblies, because all it is unisom anti-Mormonism. It's whatever helps you sleep at night. I don't have a way to describe where the Book of Mormon came from. It's clearly beyond Joseph Smith's abilities. But what if Sidney Rigdon clandestinely snuck over there, wrote the whole thing with him, and then went back and pretended to be converted when the missionaries came to him? Okay. Do you have any evidence of that at all? Well, it would just make it a lot easier to explain the Book of Mormon. Yeah, I guess that would. Except that Sidney Rigdon actually does try to expand on the Book of Mormon later in life. He claims to have received more of the Book of Mormon after he founds his 4 different churches that all fail. And it's not the Book of Mormon. So, I mean, even the premise is actually counteracted by the sources that exist. So historians don't engage in that. They don't engage in, oh, I'm sure that Ellen White must have not really believed that the Sabbath day was on Saturday, but told everyone that it was, but she destroyed her early journals that said that she knew that it wasn't on Saturday and then only talked about the fact that it was on Saturday with her later journals. Historians don't do that. We do know that there are sometimes sources that are missing, like James Buchanan had most of his records destroyed.
Chicago fire?
No. James Buchanan fire. This is the same guy who led Buchanan's blunder, the person most responsible for the coming of the American Civil War of any American president that there was. Yeah, not surprised. He doesn't want anyone to see what it is he had to say. But even knowing that, if I were to say something definitively like, James Buchanan ordered the army to Utah because he was trying to ensure that the Democrats could direct ideas away from their pro-slavery stance. Now, that's a plausible possibility, but it's not one for which I have a journal or a letter from him that says that. In this case, we're talking about something much more definitive. We don't have any records that have Joseph and Sidney meeting. Even people who are contemporary are saying that Sidney kind of took over Mormonism when he met. So historians make arguments that are plausible. They make arguments based upon sources. People on the internet make arguments based upon what they wish had happened. They don't have to follow the rules of academia, so they get to say whatever they want. But that's a good rule of thumb. If it's a good argument, it's not coming from the letter to the CES director. If it's a good argument, if it's a historical argument, it's coming from a historian. So if someone makes an argument about, oh, this is where the Book of Mormon actually came from, and there's not a Presbyterian professor of religious studies that is also making that argument, then it's not a very good argument. And that's how you know.
Is it possible that they're making a historical argument, but they don't necessarily feel like it? They certainly don't know the rules, as you say, right? Because they're not a historian, but they feel maybe like they're making more of a religious argument or something like what makes a person, like you call it unisom Mormonism,
Anti-Mormonism,
right?
yeah.
Because it helps them to be able to
Helps
sleep
them
at
sleep
night,
at night.
explaining where these things come from. But is it just that they're so ignorant to what the rules even are, to where they would make an argument? The Sidney Rigdon argument lacks any evidence whatsoever. Why would somebody make that argument?
Because it allows them to explain the unexplainable. It's the exact same thing that happens in the New Testament, right? Well, let's get his parents and find out if he was really born blind. Why? Because if we can find out that he wasn't actually born blind, now we have an explanation for why he suddenly can see. And that's the reason why the Sanhedrin's so upset when the guy says, yeah, and his parents say, yeah, he's born blind. It's a way to try to explain away the miracle without having to just say, well, I just don't believe. Because guess what? Well, I just don't believe is absolutely subjective. It is, thank you for your opinion. It is duly noted. Tip of the cap, and you're on your way. Right? Why would that person's opinion that I just don't believe carry any weight? That's why, look, you can believe or not believe. Everyone has the freedom of belief. Joseph Smith thought we should fight for the fact that everyone should have the ability to believe or not believe. But once you begin to make a historical argument for why you can't believe, you don't get to just throw the rules of history out the window in order to make your argument. I didn't force you to make a historical argument about why you don't believe. You can simply just say, I don't believe. But the moment you say, oh, it's obvious that Sidney Rigdon just wrote the Book of Mormon, well, guess what? It better actually be obvious, and there better actually be sources that are surrounding it, because you're no longer making a religious argument. You're making a historical one. And historical arguments have to follow the rules of history.
To paraphrase the documentary Happy Gilmore, well, now you're in my world, Grandma.
Yeah, you're in my world now, Grandma.
You will go to sleep or I will put you to sleep.
Yeah, can I get some warm milk? Helps me sleep before bed. Probably a lot of people listening are wishing they had some warm milk because they're also falling asleep based on this.
Well, so as we're well into this now, we're not going to have time to play the clip. So maybe we set up a little bit of Dr. Philastus Hurlbut and Solomon Spaulding. If you want to set that up a little more, and then we can go into the part 2 where we can dive right in.
Well, so we'll be playing a clip, but I think it's important to know. I'm leaving everybody hanging.
That's what we do. It's a tease.
Yeah,
we keep them coming back.
If you are somebody who is struggling with your testimony because there are aspects of church history that don't make sense to you, first and foremost, stop looking for answers from people who are not themselves experts. You wouldn't do that for any other aspect of your life. You would not have your car break down and go to someone who knows nothing about engines but really likes to drive cars to tell you what's wrong with your car. You'd go to a mechanic. You would not, if you got a toothache, you would not go find somebody who's good with power drills and say, hey, think maybe you could get this tooth out for me? You'd go to someone who is a trained and recognized expert. The problem when we have questions about our church history is that the most readily accessible answers come from the least reliable and least authoritative and least trained people. And frankly, that's the problem with the internet all the way around. Because it comes up first on a Google search is not in and of itself proof that it's a good argument. And we're easily deceived by these not good arguments. Why? Because they're things we haven't heard before. And so we mistake our lack of knowledge about the thing for that thing being true or false, depending on what it is we're talking about. What I'm asking is that if you're struggling with the church over church history topics, that you cease to try to find answers from sources that aren't trying to give you answers, but are trying to destroy your faith. Faith is a choice. Believing that Jesus was resurrected is not something that you believe because you can prove it. You believe it because it's true. The church has produced gospel topics essays. The church has produced manuals that discuss many of these difficult topics. There are all kinds of resources from faithful scholars who can discuss these very difficult things. And if you want to still have that fire of faith, if you want to have some explanation, there are many credible places you can go. But the moment we start looking at non-credible places, at non-historians' arguments about our own history, it's not a surprise that quickly things start to fly out of focus because the arguments they're making are not accurate arguments at all. So thanks so much for joining us, and I'm gonna have to go take a nap or something, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's nap time on the Standard of Truth podcast. Thanks for your emails.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat. If you know anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. And for more resources, visit standardoftruth.com. Until next time.